I walked into my own apartment and found my son showing it off to a realtor like I had already died. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and please tell me and others what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late. Share it in the comments below. Thanks. His wife was there too, grinning and saying it would be perfect for a baby's room. Then, Adam, my son, turned to me, as calm as ever, and said, "You'll die soon anyway, Mom. Why not give it to us now?" In that moment, I knew they weren't going to wait. They were ready to wipe me out of their lives. But what they didn't know was that I had already started cutting them out of mine, taking their names off my will, my bank accounts, and anything else I could. By the time they figured it out, I planned to be long gone. Let me back up a bit. My name is Ella Lana Whitaker. I'm 72 years old. Just last Tuesday, I came home from my usual morning walk. I do it every day, strolling around the block with my tea and a scarf over my hair rollers. When I pushed open the door, I heard voices that didn't belong. At first, I thought maybe Adam had actually stopped by to check on me, though he almost never visits unless Tiffany nags him. But then, I heard Tiffany's sugary voice floating through my living room, sounding like she already owned the place. "And here's the kitchen," she said in that chirpy tone. "You said the sunlight is great for staging, right?" I stood frozen in the doorway, my grocery bag slipping down my arm. Then I saw them, Adam in one of his stiff shirts and Tiffany, clutching her fancy Starbucks cup, showing a smiling woman in heels around like they were filming one of those house-flipping shows. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just watched while Tiffany opened my cabinets without asking. Adam pointed at the wall where my late husband's military photo still hung and said, "This whole section could come out," like he'd already decided to tear it all down. Finally, the realtor asked, "And your mom's okay with the timing?" That's when Adam turned and saw me standing there, still holding the milk. He didn't even look surprised. "Mom," he said, like he just noticed me, "we were going to tell you, but be honest, you're going to die soon. You've had a good run, right?" I swear, it felt like my spirit floated out of my body and was watching everything from across the room. Tiffany looked a little uncomfortable, but not enough to stop smiling. "It just makes sense," she said. "You have no stairs, great lighting, and we really need space for the baby." There is no baby, I thought. There wasn't even a pregnancy, just some Pinterest board and her hunger to play pretend. I set the groceries down and walked over to my chair. No one stopped talking. No one asked if I was okay. Adam kept pointing around like I wasn't there. And Tiffany told the realtor they could have the place cleaned out in a month sooner if I cooperated. Cooperated, like I was some stranger squatting in my own home. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, they all left, chatting in the hallway about paint colors. When the door closed behind them, I just stared at the old dent in my coffee table, the one Adam made when he was 6, pretending to be Batman. That night, I poured a glass of red wine, turned off all the lights, and sat alone in the dark. My heart wasn't just broken, it felt hollow and still, like something had gone quiet inside me. I realized then that they never really saw me as a person, only as something to use. And now that they thought I had nothing left to give, they were ready to erase me. But that was the night I stopped being scared of dying. It was the night I started planning. The next morning, I got up at 6. Just like always, I made my coffee, fed the cat, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where Tiffany had stood with her expensive coffee. I wasn't sad anymore. I felt something colder and sharper, like a blade. I knew I had to protect just my feelings, but my home and everything I still owned. If they were bold enough to bring a realtor into my apartment while I was still alive, they were capable of much worse. So I dug through my drawer of old gadgets until I found the little voice recorder Adam bought me years ago when I said I might write a book. I charged it, tested it, and the next time Adam came over, I made sure it was recording inside my purse, half sipped on the floor near the couch. He didn't even knock. He just walked in, like he already had the keys. Tiffany came right behind him with her shiny new haircut and that fake smile. "We just want to help you, Mom," Adam said, like that made everything okay. "It's not safe for you to live alone. What if you fall? What if you forget the stove?" I asked him when the last time was that I forgot anything. He didn't answer. Tiffany sighed and pulled out her phone. "We've been looking into assisted living," she said, scrolling like she was booking me a weekend trip. "Just short term, until we figure out long-term care. That was when I knew for sure they weren't planning to wait for me to die. They were going to shove me into a facility, tell everyone I'd lost my mind, and take everything while I was still breathing. I smiled like everything was fine and nodded, telling them I'd think about it. Then I walked them to the door and waved goodbye like some sweet old lady who didn't know any better. But the second they turned the corner, I yanked the recorder out of my purse and hit play. Every single word was their Tiffany's sugary, fake nice voice, Adam's pretend concern, and their whole plan spelled out like instructions. I emailed the recording to myself, saved it onto 2 flash drives, and hid them in different drawers around the apartment, just in case. That same day, I called Margaret. She's my oldest friend, the one person who's never made me feel like an afterthought. We met for tea at her house, and I told her everything what they said, how they acted like I was already dead. Margaret didn't say much at first. She just sipped her tea and watched me with those sharp, knowing eyes she's always had. Then she reached into her filing cabinet and pulled out a business card. He helped my sister when her kids tried to pull the same stunt, she said. The card was for a lawyer named David Levinson, who specializes in elder law and financial abuse. I called him the next day. I told him I needed to know exactly what I could do before anyone tried to steal what I'd worked for. David didn't talk to me like I was some helpless old woman. He spoke to me like a real client, like someone with rights. He told me to start keeping records of everything, to never sign any papers, and most important of all, to act like nothing was wrong. That night, I put the recorder back in my purse, triple-checked all my locks, and created a folder on my computer called Groceries so no one would think twice if they saw it. Inside that folder, I started saving proof. Because if my own son was going to try to erase me, I was going to make sure I had every receipt. A week later, I walked down to the building office to ask about renewing my lease early, just to protect myself. The moment I said my name, the assistant manager looked at me like she'd swallowed something wrong. She flipped through her clipboard, trying not to meet my eyes. "You're not on the lease anymore," she finally said, her voice small. My heart thumped so hard I thought it might burst. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound calm even though I felt my whole body go hot. She hesitated again, then pulled out the lease file and turned it so I could see. Adam's name was on it, only his. My name had been crossed out and pen crossed out like I was some note nobody needed. I told her there must be a mistake. She nodded nervously and said she'd talked to the building supervisor, but I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't something that just happened yesterday. I walked home so slowly, it felt like my knees had aged 20 years in 10 minutes. As soon as I got inside, I started opening every drawer and folder, searching for the last lease copy I'd signed. I found it my signature, my date, still perfectly legal. I took photos, scanned everything, and sent it straight to David. He called me back within the hour. His voice was calm but tighter now. "This is fraud," he said. "They can't just take you off without your consent, especially if you've been paying rent." "I have," I told him, "every month, from my own account." "Then we've got grounds," he said, "but don't confront them yet. Let them keep thinking they're getting away with it." That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there in the dark, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling. I kept thinking about all the little ways Adam had been getting ready for this, his fake worry, his sudden interest in what pills I was taking, how he kept asking about my bills. It wasn't kindness, it was inventory. He'd been treating me like some dying business he couldn't wait to shut down. The next morning, I checked my mail and found a flyer slipped between the bills, a flyer for an estate planner. The same company Tiffany had bragged about, the one where her cousin worked. I knew then it wasn't random. They were trying to push me into making plans, not to help me but to grab everything before I was even gone. I tossed the flyer in the trash. Then I pulled out my savings book from the fireproof box under my bed. I wasn't rich, but I'd been careful and quiet about what I had. I had enough to protect myself if I needed to. That night, I sat down and started a list everything I owned that could be sold fast. Jewelry, antiques, my late husband's coin collection hidden behind the bookshelf. I wasn't going to sit around and let them take it. Not without a fight. I had already decided I wasn't going to just sit there and let them take everything I had built. I was going to disappear in when they finally came looking for my things. They'd find nothing but empty rooms and memories they didn't deserve to keep. By the end of that week, I had a plan. It wasn't perfect or fancy, but it was good enough to let me move quietly while they kept thinking. I was just some forgetful old woman who still used a flip phone and didn't know how to log into a bank account. The first thing I did was sort through my jewelry box. I made 3 piles. One pile was the things I wore often, so they'd expect to see them. The second was pieces I could sell without anyone noticing. The third was the things I loved too much to ever part with, no matter how bad it got. I took that second pile and drove 3 towns over to a little pawn shop I remembered from years ago. It was run by a kind woman named Carla, who once told me at church how pretty my sapphire brooch was. She didn't ask me any questions. She just looked over each piece carefully and then handed me an envelope stuffed with cash. I left with nothing but the receipt and a fast heartbeat, knowing I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. After that, I listed some of my furniture on a private resale website under a fake name. Just the big pieces I didn't need anymore, like the glass cabinet Adam always said looked old, and the vintage lamp Tiffany couldn't stop staring at like she already owned it. They sold quickly. I made sure the pickups happened when I knew Adam wouldn't be stopping by. With every sale, I felt lighter, like I was peeling away the layers of their expectations. I even sold the piano no one had played in 20 years, except the cleaning lady. That stung a little, but not enough to make me stop. Next, I looked over all my bank accounts. I closed 2 of them and moved everything into a brand new high-security account that David, my lawyer, helped me open under a trust name. It was a hassle filling out all the forms, but it meant Adam would never be able to find it, touch it, or even know it existed. I cleared out my safe deposit box to the one downtown that Adam didn't even know I had. I took out old bonds, personal letters, and my husband's watch and brought them to Margaret's house in a locked case. She didn't ask why. Just poured me some tea and nodded like she'd been waiting for me to become this person. Then I called a different realtor, not the pushy one they used before. This time, I chose a woman named Leah who worked alone and specialized in quiet sales. I told her I wanted everything done privately. No open houses, no for sale signs, just serious buyers. She didn't flinch when I said I wanted it all wrapped up fast. I want to be gone before anyone realizes I've left, I told her. She gave me this look like she understood exactly who I was running from. By the end of the month, my apartment listing was live under a coded ID. The showings were scheduled for times when I'd be out at the doctor or the grocery store. I kept Adam and Tiffany completely in the dark. When they visited, everything looked exactly the same. Same pillows, same photos on the shelves. But most of it was an illusion. The kitchen cabinets were almost empty. My closet was half cleared out. The bookshelves held only a few decoy titles. They didn't notice a thing. They never did unless it was something they could take. What they didn't realize was that the apartment they were standing in wasn't mine anymore, not in my heart, not in my mind, and soon not on any paperwork. I was already gone. They were just talking to a ghost, sitting in the same old chair. I had just finished signing the sale agreement when Margaret called me again and asked if I could come over for tea. Her voice sounded different, soft but heavy, like she was carrying something big. When I got there, she already had 2 cups poured and a manila envelope sitting right in the middle of the coffee table. It felt like it was watching me. I sat down, feeling the usual comfort of her living room. The same crochet blanket was draped over the armrest. The same old cat was sleeping in the corner, but the air was thick, like we were about to cross a line we couldn't step back over. Margaret didn't waste time. She slid the envelope toward me and said, "You deserve to know everything before you leave." Her words hit me hard, because I hadn't told her I was leaving. Not really, not out loud, but I guess old friends can just feel these things. I opened the envelope slowly, scared of what I might find. Inside was a stack of papers. The first one was a birth certificate, not Adam's, but his mother's. My sister Leah. Just seeing her name made my throat close up. I hadn't spoken it in years, not since the funeral, not since I buried the truth to protect Adam from it. Margaret watched me, quiet but steady. "You weren't wrong to raise him like your own," she finally said. "But he deserves to know, and so do you." That's when it sank in. Adam didn't know. He didn't know that Leah was his real mother, that I was just the aunt who stepped in when she couldn't get clean, the one who changed every diaper, who stayed up all night through every fever and every broken heart, who kept the lie alive because it felt safer than the truth. He didn't know. And now, the boy I saved was the man trying to bury me alive in paperwork and lies. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, staring at the papers, remembering how small Adam was. The day I first brought him home. How he used to wrap his little arms around my leg if a stranger got too close. How he used to call me Mommy Ellie, until one day he dropped the Ellie and just called me Mom. Margaret reached across the table and rested her hand on mine. "If you're going to walk away," she said softly, "walk away, with everything. No more secrets. Not even from yourself." I took the envelope home and tucked it into the same drawer where I kept my updated will. I didn't plan on telling Adam. Not yet. Maybe never. But having the truth right there in my hands made everything feel sharper, more real. He had never truly been mine by blood. But I had loved him like he was. I'd given him everything. And now, here he was, selling off my life like it was just some old junk he didn't want to clean up. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the envelope, and I felt something settle in my chest. It wasn't grief. It wasn't anger. It was something colder and more final. I realized I wasn't just fighting for my home anymore. I was fighting for my name, my story, and the truth of everything I'd worked so hard to protect. And in that moment, I knew Adam would never see me again, not unless I decided he would, and by then, it would be too late. After I put the envelope away, I stopped sleeping through the night. Not because I was scared, but because my mind wouldn't quit, spinning with every worst-case scenario. I kept picturing all the ways Adam and Tiffany might try to rush their plan. By the third sleepless night, I knew I needed more than a voice recording. I needed proof they couldn't twist or deny. So I ordered a nanny cam online disguised as a table lamp and set it up in the corner of my living room where it could see everything. I didn't have to wait long. That Sunday, they showed up again right after church. Tiffany walked in carrying a store-bought pie, pretending she remembered I liked blueberry when I've actually hated blueberry my whole life. Adam was all smiles, laying it on thick. "We've been talking," he said, "and we think you might really like this community center we found." I knew exactly what they were doing, trying to look like caring children on camera, trying to get me to say something they could use later to make it look like I agreed to leave. So I smiled and nodded, playing the harmless old lady they thought I was. I offered them tea and watched out of the corner of my eye as Tiffany said she needed the bathroom, but she didn't go there. I knew because the hallway light clicked on, and I heard the tiny squeak of my medicine cabinet door, the one she didn't realize made noise. I sat there with Adam, talking about pretend activities and places while Tiffany slipped back into the room with a smug little grin, like she'd just planted her flag. I didn't say a word. I thanked them for the pie, walked them out, and closed the door behind them with a smile that never touched my eyes. The second they were gone, I ran to my bedroom and flung open the cabinet. 3 of my pill bottles had been swapped out for old, expired ones. The labels were just barely different enough to trick anyone who didn't look closely. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because they were so sure of themselves, so sloppy. I raced to my laptop and pulled up the camera footage. I watched every second of it, Tiffany's reflection, as she crept into my room, rummaged through my things, switched my medicine, then stood in front of the mirror, practicing a worried face, like she was rehearsing for the moment she'd call social services and pretend to be concerned. My stomach didn't twist in fear, it twisted in anger, steady, cold anger. I clipped the footage, backed it up twice, and emailed it to David with the subject line. They crossed the line. He called me within an hour. His voice was calm but tight. He said I had enough evidence for a restraining order right then, if I wanted it. But I told him, no, not yet. Not until I was ready to make my final move, because they still thought I was a step behind. And I needed them to keep thinking that for just a little while longer. That night, I moved the lamp camera to the dining room, just in case they came back before I finished selling the place. Then, I stood in the middle of my emptying apartment. The walls were bare. Half my boxers were already packed. The furniture was disappearing one piece at a time, and I realized I didn't feel sad, not even a little bit, because what they wanted was just a space, a building. But the thing they could never take, no matter how many keys or papers they had, was me. The part of me that remembered birthdays and sick nights, that held little hands and forgave tantrums, that gave up years and savings for the boy who now thought he was clever enough to gaslight the woman who raised him. And right then, I swore that when I finally disappeared, I wouldn't leave a single breadcrumb for them to follow. Once David confirmed that the footage was strong enough to hold up in court, I moved to the last step of my plan, my will. real will. Not the old copy Adam had probably snooped through years ago. The one where he thought he'd already won, just because he saw his name written down, not knowing what was actually waiting for him. I was ready to erase that old future completely. So the next Thursday, I put on my nicest cardigan and carried every piece of proof I had: video of Tiffany messing with my pills, audio of their phony visits, the fake lease papers, even photos of all the empty drawers and things I'd sold. I walked into David's office feeling steady and sure. When he asked what I wanted to do about my will, I didn't even hesitate. I told him to cut Adam out completely. No warning, no explanation, not even a single dollar. Instead, I set up a trust to help a women's shelter in my late sister Leia's name. Even with all her struggles, she was still Adam's real mother. She deserved to be remembered for more than a death certificate and a closed casket. The rest of what I had, I left to the places that had kept me going all these years: my church, the school where I taught for 3 decades, and Margaret, who had never treated me like a burden. Even when I showed up on her porch scared and shaking, while David typed out the final papers, I felt something inside me click into place, like a door had closed forever. Because this wasn't just paperwork, it was me saying out loud, "I see what you did, and you don't get to win." Once I signed it all, we locked the documents in his fireproof cabinet. We made 3 copies: one for him, one for me, and one sealed envelope I told him to mail only if I ever said so. When I walked out of that office into the sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd finally stepped out of the life I'd been trapped and held hostage by guilt and old obligations, and into one where I was free to put myself first. The timing was perfect. 2 days later, the apartment sale closed. The buyer paid in full, no questions asked. I moved the money straight into the trust, with no ties to Adam, not even a mailing address he could trace. By the time Adam showed up that Sunday with Tiffany clutching his arm and a fake smile plastered on his face, I was already packed. My purse held my keys and a prepaid phone. The only thing I left behind was a note taped inside the kitchen cabinet. It said, "You mourned me before I died. Now live with it." And while they were standing there reading it, realizing what I'd done, I was already 3 states away, sitting on the balcony of a little 1-bedroom apartment I'd rented under my maiden name. My new neighbors didn't know a thing about my past. To them, I was just another quiet woman starting over. For the first time in decades, I slept through the night. No pills, no fear, no one waiting to take what was mine. It only took 2 weeks before a thick white envelope showed up in my new mailbox. No return address, but I didn't need one. The title stamped across the front, Whitaker versus Whitaker, told me everything. When I opened it, my hands didn't even shake. Not because I wasn't angry, because I had expected this childish tantrum the second Adam realized he'd been cut out of everything. Sure enough, it was a lawsuit claiming I'd caused them emotional distress, accusing me of financial sabotage, and trying to say I was mentally unwell. They even tried to paint me as some confused old woman manipulated by David and Margaret. It was almost laughable if it hadn't been so predictable. But what made my blood boil was Tiffany's statement. She said I had episodes of paranoia, pointing to the hidden camera lamp as proof I was spying on them out of irrational fear. Of course, she left out the part where she was sneaking into my bedroom to swap my medicine and plotting to have me committed. I could picture her smug face as she signed that statement, like she was starring in a courtroom drama, practicing fake tears while Adam sat there pretending to be the heartbroken son who just wanted the best for his mother. For a moment, I could almost hear their voices, trying to drag me back into the role of the frail old woman they thought they could control. But I didn't let it get to me, not even for a second. Because I had everything: videos, documents, witness. David, who'd already guessed they'd pulled this stunt, he'd filed a counterclaim the very same day, accusing them of elder abuse, fraud, and tampering with my medication. I didn't even need to testify. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. When Adult Protective Services got the video and our sworn statements, they opened an investigation into Adam and Tiffany for coercion and exploitation. That meant I finally got to watch them squirm legally and financially without lifting a finger. They tried to tell friends and family it was all a misunderstanding, but the truth came out, bit by bit, especially after David made sure that videos were filed publicly as part of the court record. The real blow came when Adam tried to challenge the apartment sale and was told he had no claim to it, no loophole to exploit. The place had legally belonged to me alone, and I'd sold it fair and square. I pictured him pacing around his fancy kitchen, yelling at Tiffany while she scrolled her phone, looking for someone else to blame. Meanwhile, I sat on my balcony, sipping iced tea and watching the birds land on the railing next to the plants I'd picked out all by myself. And for the first time in years, every decision was mine. I made every decision for myself this time, without guilt or duty or some twisted idea of love hanging over my head. And when David called to say the case had been thrown out for good, dismissed with prejudice, so they couldn't ever bring it back, I thanked him, hung up, and put on my favorite old jazz record. I turned it up just loud enough to fill the apartment, and let the music wrap around me like a celebration. Because this wasn't just about winning in court, it was about taking back every single piece of myself they'd tried to strip away, and knowing that no matter how many tantrums they threw, I'd built a wall around my life that they could never climb, and for once, I was finally safe behind it. The day Adam showed up at my new door, it wasn't a big scene. No yelling, no banging, no police. I opened the door and saw him standing there, looking tired and older, with his hands shoved deep in the pockets of a jacket I didn't recognize. Right away, I knew this wasn't a power play anymore. It was the last card of a man who finally realized he'd lost something he couldn't ever buy back. For a moment, neither of us said a word. We just stood there in the doorway, where strangers usually passed me by without even a glance. He looked different, like the weight of everything had finally started to sink in. Then he spoke, soft, almost like the boy I'd raised so many lifetimes ago. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry." Those 3 words hit harder than all the betrayals combined, because they came too late. Years too late, after everything had already shattered and been swept away. I didn't move. I didn't open the door any wider. I just looked at him and waited, because whatever apology he was trying to give, it wasn't going to fix what he'd done. He seemed to understand that. He didn't ask to come in. He didn't talk about the lawsuit or the money or Tiffany. He just stood there and told me he'd messed up, that he'd gotten caught up in the idea of control, that he thought he was doing the right thing until he watched it all fall apart and realized I wasn't the one losing anything, he was. And for a moment, I wanted to believe him. I really did, because the part of me that was still a mother never disappeared completely. It just got quiet. But the woman he tried to erase had finally grown a spine, and she wasn't about twofold just because he remembered how to cry. So I let him talk. Let him say how he missed Sunday breakfasts, how he'd found one of my old scarves in a drawer and it still smelled like my perfume, how he'd been checking the Trust website every week to see if my name was still there, if I was still alive. And when he finally stopped, I asked him the only question that mattered. "Do you regret what you did, or do you just regret losing?" He didn't answer right away, just looked down at the floor like he couldn't stand to say it out loud. That was my answer. I nodded, and I told him calm, without anger, but without any softness either. "You mourned me before I died, Adam. I'm just honoring your wish." Then I stepped back and closed the door, not slammed it, not locked it in his face, just closed it like the end of a book I'd finally finished reading, a story that had gone on too long. I turned and walked back to my chair by the window, one with the Afghan I crocheted last winter, and felt the strangest peace settle over me. Not because it didn't still hurt, but because I finally knew the part of me that had been waiting for him to wake up was done waiting. That day, I didn't replay the conversation or imagine a different ending. I just folded my laundry, made soup, and let the quiet settle around me like a friend I trusted again. After Adam left and the door was closed, nothing changed overnight, but the silence felt different. More mine, more safe. And I got back to living my days without looking over my shoulder or checking the hallway camera before I made coffee. That kind of peace, even when it's quiet, is loud in its own way. My apartment was small but bright. The people here were the kind who brought soup if you had a cold and left extra tomatoes on your doorstep without a note. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by who I used to be or what I'd lost. I was just Eleanor, or Ellie, depending on who was calling. I kept a notebook by my bed, and little by little, I started writing it all down. Not because I wanted revenge or thought anyone would care, but because if this could happen to me, it had probably happened to someone else, too. And maybe, if they read it, they'd know they weren't losing their mind. I didn't call it a story. I just called it notes. When I finished, I typed it up and emailed it to a local women's newsletter my book club friend told me about. They publish essays and true stories, and you can stay anonymous if you want. I didn't expect much, but a month later, I got an email from the editor saying it had been shared over 100 times, passed around churches, retirement groups, and elder law forums. No spotlight, no viral post, just slow, quiet sharing, and that was enough. A few weeks later, one of the aides at the senior center mentioned she'd read something that reminded her of her grandma. I just nodded. Even Margaret didn't know until I told her over coffee. She shook her head and smiled. "Of course you did," she said. "I didn't put my name on it. I didn't need to. It wasn't about me. It was about the warning, because this kind of thing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in little pieces, through politeness, through pressure, through smiles that hide paperwork." Adam never reached out again after that day. Tiffany didn't either. I don't know if they ever read what I wrote. And honestly, I don't need to know. What matters is the story is out there now, exactly how it happened. And maybe, if someone sees themselves in it, they'll do one small thing differently: hide that account, save that receipt, trust their gut before someone tells them they're imagining things. That's why I shared it. That's why I'm here. And if you've made it this far, then I guess it worked. I stayed alive, and they didn't get what they came for: not my apartment, not my money, and definitely not my silence. That's today's story. If it touched you, leave a like and subscribe. And don't forget, share your own life lesson in the comments below.